From Washington, D.C., the swamp itself, this is The Week's Worst with Allen and Vadum. I'm Dr. Stephen J. Allen, Vice President and Chief Investigative Officer of the Capital Research Center.
I'm Matthew Vadum, Senior Vice President at Capital Research Center and Editor-in-Chief of BombThrowers.com.
This is our podcast in which we dig through the news for stories that we think are the most outrageous, the most ridiculous, the worst. We do it so you don't have to. And Matthew, you're going to be talking about the inauguration.
Isn't it amazing that we're now in the Trump era? It's been surreal to me that he actually won on November the 8th. And, you know, he's actually the president now, just barely 2/3 of a mile away from our office here at Capital Research Center. And it still hasn't really sunk in.
Yeah, I still occasionally go onto YouTube and look at the video from election night and the shocked expressions of the people at the Clinton campaign headquarters. And, you know, it's sort of good to see the privileged and the powerful and the people who were there who support the privileged and the powerful and support the most crooked politician in American history, Hillary Clinton, and to see them, the reactions on their faces as everything sort of slips away. And you can go on different TV channels, NBC, CBS, NBC, Fox, etc., and you see all around the same time as when everybody started to realize what was going on and what a surprise it was on election night between 9 o'clock Eastern Time and about 10:30. And it really hit around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time was when people really started to appreciate it. So then you carry it forward to the inauguration, and you think of all this, after all this time has passed, that people would get over their disappointment, their anger, but no. Not at all.
No, not at all. And now the people who didn't support Donald Trump in the election are beginning to realize that President Trump actually intends to fulfill his campaign promises. And this is, well, revolutionary, wouldn't you say, Dr. Allen?
Yeah, it's very unusual. People are sort of shocked that he's doing the things that he said he was going to do. And you have a few things that maybe haven't been done yet, or that have been fiddled with in terms of the promises, turning those into reality. But I got to tell you, I've never seen a president as strictly following his campaign promises as Donald Trump. I'll give you an example. Every Republican president always promises to move the embassy for Israel to Jerusalem. They recognize that as the capital.
But they don't really mean it.
But they don't mean it, and you've had several Republican presidents who've gotten elected on that promise, and none of them ever even took a step to do that. And I can see Donald Trump doing that.
Well, he already seems to be acting like he really doesn't want to do it. So this is a new experience in modern American politics, a politician who actually says what he means and tries to fulfill his campaign promises. Now, this has led to anticipation of the arrival of the Trump administration, has caused a lot of turmoil in D.C. and the rest of the country. And this was dealt with our movie, our 20-minute documentary that launched 8 days ago, and has now got, closing in on 300,000 views, maybe 280,000. It's very, very successful for our 20-minute mini documentary that's called America Under Siege, Civil War 2017, which you can view at our website, capitalresearch.org, or at our documentary division website, which is dangerousdocumentaries.com. And we invite you to go there and watch this and see Trevor Loudon, one of the world's leading experts on left-wing organizations, dissect the J20 Disrupt crowd, who were trying to prevent, at first, President Trump from being sworn in. Now, of course, everybody knows that was never going to happen, but they wanted to make it as unpleasant and inconvenient for him. They wanted to have like crowds shouting in the streets and throwing Molotov cocktails and doing all sorts of other horrible things. And they were hoping to force the inauguration indoors so that it wouldn't be celebrated. but they didn't succeed. And something else that people don't seem to have been focusing on is that the inauguration festivities are not a celebration of the person who is becoming president. The inauguration ceremonies are first and foremost a celebration of our constitutional order, of the peaceful transfer of power between individuals, between presidents. There was a lot of sneering and hostility between President Obama and President Trump in the transition period, but we didn't actually have an outbreak of physical violence, as is common in many countries during the transition period.
And that, of course, is something that goes back to the early days of this country, because people were wondering, should we have a president for life? That was a common view among the founders, was that we should have a president for life, but then others prevailed to have a limited term president. And then, of course, when George Washington came in, he could have been president for life simply by getting himself elected and reelected till the end of his life. But he chose to stop being president. And that was one of the most amazing moments in American history and really set the tone. And since then, nobody other than Franklin Roosevelt has been president for more than 2 terms. And that's sort of a tradition. And of course, it was eventually written into the Constitution to limit the president to 2 terms. But the idea that you voluntarily give over power, that's a celebration. That's like the 4th of July. That's not any particular political party. And so for the elitists in Hollywood to be putting pressure on people, telling people in the entertainment business that if you show up at the Trump inauguration, well, you'll never eat lunch in this town again. That is very much un-American. That goes against the spirit of this country.
Crazy authoritarian intimidation. That's what it is.
And we saw the mindset of these people. First of all, there were hundreds of arrests, not far from where we are right now. There were people throwing rocks through the Starbucks window, the McDonald's window. I've eaten at the McDonald's, and but then afterward. You had the march, the Women's March, the day after, and of course that brought out a lot of
which I'm told is a
well.
completely separate event that has nothing to do with the disruption, the disruptor activists.
Well, all these groups are connected, and of course that's one of the things we do here at Capitol Research Center is we show the connections between all the different radical groups and the violent groups, extremist groups, and so on.
I was actually at the Women's March inadvertently last Saturday, January 21st. I was going to, and this is such a delicious irony, I was going to Joe's Seafood, where upstairs they were having a reception hosted by Eagle Forum, honoring their late great leader, Phyllis Schlafly, a real American original, a female political trailblazer who essentially single-handedly stopped the Equal Rights Amendment, the misnamed Equal Rights Amendment, in the 1970s. And she was a force to be reckoned with, and an ardent Trump supporter. Her book, I think it was called The Case for Trump, came out the day after she died a few months ago. So she never got to see Trump elected, but she was very sincere in her support, and she almost got ousted from her organization. People on the board of Eagle Forum were not upset when she gave a full-throated endorsement to Donald Trump. But it was, as I said, such a delicious irony to be at this reception while the freak show was outside, the Women's March, with people wearing their so-called pussy hats, pink snow caps with little pointy ears, supposed to be cats, I guess. And this was in response to that old remark that surfaced during the campaign of Donald Trump making vulgar remarks, saying, grab him by the pussy. And we don't know if he did. He was just, it seemed like just male bonding, male, bragging, sexual bragging, locker room talk. But that's what created this meme with all the pussycats and all the jokes that came out of that.
Which the
They
Trump
were outside chanting, "We are the popular vote. We are the popular vote." And I'm not sure what they intended to accomplish by that. They certainly weren't the majority in a four-way presidential race. No one got a majority of the popular votes.
Right, and the votes that were cast for either Trump or for candidates to the right of Trump, those added up to more than the votes cast for the liberal or leftist candidates. So
Right, for Hillary plus Jill Stein.
You could say the conservatives got more votes than the liberals in that race, and that's absolutely true and undisputable. But yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the Equal Rights Amendment. Just as an aside, I covered some of that debate, and I remember there were certain things that were said that if the Equal Rights Amendment passed, that might happen, and people on the other side, they debunked that. They said, absolutely not. That would never happen in a million years, and we don't want that, and that will never happen. We won't allow it. And those specific things were that you would have same-sex marriage, that you would have women in the military and even in combat, and that you would have problems with people going to the bathroom as to which bathroom they would be allowed to go to. And those were three very specific things. So
So we got the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, through judicial fiat eventually.
Right, and regardless of what one thinks about those particular developments, the fact is that they lied when they said that this was not something that was ever going to happen if their ideology were carried through. It's the old, well, it'll never happen here, but then eventually it does. And Phyllis Schlafly, of course, was a woman who was a hero to conservatives, but was hated by feminists for her views, even though she was a woman. She's actually the person who coined the term when she ran for Congress. She came up with that slogan, "A woman's place is in the House and in the Senate." And you see that now being used by people on the left, and they, of course, have no idea.
And that former Congresswoman Pat Schroeder claimed to have coined the term.
Yes, which was many years.
A woman's place is in the House. Yeah. Wasn't that the name of a self-promoting memoir she released?
And that, of course, was many years later after Phyllis Schlafly used it. But going back to the march and the people participating in it, of course, you had Madonna talking about when she's thought about blowing up the White House, and I get it. She's just some stupid singer who shouldn't be paid attention to, except they're putting her up there as their spokesperson. And obviously, if somebody on the other side said anything anywhere close to that, you would have the Secret Service immediately wrestling them to the ground, or at least calls for that to happen. And then there was the incredible Ashley Judd. And again, this is not a nobody. This is not somebody who isn't a well-known political activist. She was the person the Democratic Party wanted to run for the U.S. Senate in Kentucky in this last election against Rand Paul.
Are we going to have a poetry reading now, Dr. Allen?
Well,
because I would really love that.
She said, and part of this, I guess, is she's quoting this poem which of course, often people will do that. They'll try to put it off on the person they're quoting, but she's the one that's actually saying the words. She referred to herself, of course, as a nasty woman. That's a reference to Trump saying that about Hillary, and Hillary was a nasty woman in the sense that she was a nasty person and she was a woman.
Well, it seems Ashley Judd is also pretty nasty.
Yeah, and so she said that we have a mustache traded for a toupee. Nazis renamed the cabinet electoral conversion therapy. The new gas chambers shaming the gay out of America, turning rainbows into suicide. I'm not as nasty as racism, fraud, conflict of interest, homophobia, sexual assault, transphobia, white supremacy, misogyny, ignorance, white privilege. Your daughter being your... Well, I'll just go on to say she talks about Donald Trump fantasizing about his daughter.
And that was totally unfair. Donald Trump does not wear a toupee.
Okay. So, and also Ashley Judd, who at one point wanted to be the senator from Kentucky, talks about maybe the South actually is going to rise again. Maybe for some, it never really fell. And she talks about the Confederate flag and so on. And of course, Kentucky was a state that was claimed by both the Confederacy and the Union, and they went back and forth, but has a lot of Southern in its culture. And so here's somebody who wanted to be a senator from Kentucky and yet was cutting down Southerners and making really bigoted comments about Southerners. And remember, this was the week when what was the Saturday Night Live writer who said made the joke about Barron Trump, the 10-year-old son of the president, that he would be the first homeschool shooter. And this is the kind of
He
thing.
was going to climb up in a tower at a university or something and start open fire. Yeah.
Right. So people feel that they can attack the family members, in fact, of those who are, after all, deplorable. And I guess that's one of the things.
Look what they
if you're
did in
deplorable.
making fun of Sarah Palin and her members of her family.
Oh, yeah. And Sarah Palin, they made fun of her accent, which, of course, was people in that part of Alaska have what's essentially a Minnesota-Wisconsin accent because that's who settled the Matthew Valley. And but that accent became, they used it the way they use a Southern accent to indicate that a person is stupid in a comedy sketch. But they're not bigots or anything. And then on Saturday Night Live this last week, of course, they had two sketches in the first 10 minutes that referred to Donald Trump being a Russian spy. Because we all know Donald Trump is a Russian spy because he was spied on. They got blackmail material and all that stuff that left has been putting out there. One of the people who does this is or Senator Coons. He's the
Delaware.
Yeah, and he's
You mean the bearded Marxist?
So, he's the one who got elected in part because his Republican opponent, was painted by people as a witch.
No, but she was not a witch. She said so.
She was not a witch. She had made some comment on a Bill Maher show years earlier, a comedy show, talking about how in high school she hung out with the Wiccans, and they turned this into that she was a witch. But it's okay for Democrats to say that Republican is a witch. That's not sexist. That's not, I don't know, what's the term for being anti-witch? There's got to be an ism for that.
Wiccophobic?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But and then of course at the end of Saturday Night Live they had a couple of the cast members there sing a song. One of the cast members was the person who did the White House Correspondents' Dinner routine a couple of years ago, Cecily Strong, and she was in that routine supposed to skewer the President of the United States, but of course she loves the President of the United States, Barack Obama, that is, and and this was made clear on Saturday Night Live when, rather than come up with a comedy sketch about Barack Obama leaving the White House, because I guess it was just too hard to write about such a wonderful man leaving the White House.
It was just so traumatic for all those Saturday Night Live writers.
Yeah, they sang the song "To Sir with Love," and so that we don't have to pay a fee, I won't recite the lyrics, but let's just say this is a song of devotion.
By Lula.
Lulu?
Or Lula?
I think it was Lulu.
Okay, Lulu.
Yeah.
Not Petula Clark.
No.
Close though.
Okay, close. Yeah, they're almost the same person.
And that was about a black teacher who goes to teach in a nasty part of London called Brixton.
Ah, there you go. So
in
you
the
remember
60s.
that part? Yes. So
it has absolutely nothing to do with President Obama.
Nothing to do, but it's a song of devotion, and it showed that they were devoted to him, and that's why throughout the 8 years he was president, you couldn't find those funny sketches you're always used to having on Saturday Night Live. The only ones they would do about Obama were ones about how he's just too nice a guy and he's too intellectual and he doesn't take on those evil Republicans in a strong enough way.
And they would pick up on his own little self-deprecating jabs, which really weren't that self-deprecating, about how he's a skinny kid with a funny name and big ears.
Right. Yeah, you could make fun of his ears. That was okay. And they did that. I think there was one sketch that they did on a Thursday night episode of Saturday Night Live that for some reason they did, and that was a little negative toward Obama, and that was it for the whole 8 years that he was president. Well, the Democratic National Committee is trying to pick a new chair, and of course, in this age of the kind of activities we saw during the inauguration, you can see the Democratic Party moving to the left, right?
Amazingly. They are moving to the left. That's right. Sarah Boynton Brown, the executive director, I think, of the Idaho Democratic Party, gave a presentation a few days ago at a DNC chair all candidates meeting, and she said that white people need to learn to shut their mouths, and that she, as a white person, doesn't get it, but she's happy to tell other white people to zip it because white people just don't get it. And she even threw in a little patronizing y'all at one point during her speech. Y'all know what I'm saying, that kind of thing. Not that she would know it was something she apparently didn't normally say. So y'all know when you're trying to to patronize and to pander to people. At the same and that was controversial, received quite a bit of media play, but more as an oddity than as as something that was truly awful. The media, because the media is already there, and the Democratic Party is already that nutty. I should say another candidate, the Muslim terrorist tied Keith Ellison, Democratic congressman from Minnesota, at one point during that all candidates forum, said that Trayvon Martin in Florida had been executed. He used that word, executed, and that was an injustice. And we all know he wasn't executed, and it was sad that he died, but it certainly wasn't unjust. In fact, one could make the argument it was completely just, because he was killed by someone he was trying to murder. So anyway, but this myth persists among the Black Lives Matter racist crowd and its supporters like Keith Ellison, that America's a police state and that there are roving death squads going around carrying out extrajudicial executions of minorities, which is something out of a dystopian sci-fi horror movie, not something that actually reflects what's going on in reality.
Yeah, and for those who are out there whose heads might be about to explode because we said something negative about Trayvon Martin, I would simply point out that if you go back and look, you'll see it's online, the testimony of his girlfriend, who was on the phone with him during the incident, explained what happened, who also went on Piers Morgan's show on CNN and elaborated on this. And we now know that the reason Trayvon Martin laid in wait and attacked George Zimmerman was that he thought George Zimmerman was a gay guy who was following him. And he didn't want to have, as she described it, a situation where he would follow him home and rape his brother. Because, of course, we all know that's what gay people do. They'll stalk you in the middle of the night and follow you home and rape your brother. And therefore, they must be given, as she put it, whoop ass. And that's how you make sure that they learn their lesson. And that's apparently what Trayvon Martin, according to her, she was on the phone with him at the time. She gave great detailed description. And it's funny because all the lefty groups that very much covered that case, every little detail, every nuance of what happened in that case, but they left out all the things that made them look bad. And then they certainly left that part out, but that's absolutely true. So this is who became an icon, someone who was paid tribute to at the Democratic Convention, and who now the person who's running for chairman of the Democratic Party, chair of the Democratic Party, cites, and that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do. That's how far the Democrats have moved in the extremist direction, unfortunately, although I know some Republican strategists who were very happy that you have the march, you have this kind of thing going on with the DNC race, as indications the Democrats just didn't learn anything from the election that just took place.
And they didn't.
So Barack Obama started his political career with an event in the home of the most famous terrorist in America prior to Timothy McVeigh, and that's a woman named Bernadine Dorn, along with her husband and fellow terrorist with whom she once was on the lam and on the FBI most wanted list, Bill Ayers. And that's the house where Barack Obama started his race for the state Senate with the big event there. And by the way, I wrote about it back in the 90s. I was writing about the outrage that the Democrats were holding fundraisers at the home of Ayers and Dorn in Chicago. And when I wrote this story, people at first didn't believe me because it was so insane that the Democrats would pick out a terrorist or a couple of terrorists and have events at their house, but they were doing that. And Barack Obama launched his career there. Well, he then closed his career by freeing some folks from prison who have done great harm to the United States, commuting sentences, giving pardons, and so forth, mostly commutations. Chelsea Manning, of course, who provided secrets that got people killed.
You mean Bradley Manning, don't you?
Well, I tend to let people call themselves whatever they want, even when they're monsters who got people killed. I'm one of those. I don't think that people who are going through the process of transitioning to another gender. I don't think they're doing it for fun. I think, getting body parts cut off is kind of a drastic thing. That hasn't happened yet, but that's, and I think we're still on the...
Hey, if Bradley Manning does that, then I can respect that. Then I'll call him Chelsea.
Okay. But I think we're going to end up having to pay for it. I think it's been arranged so that
of course
the taxpayers will end up having to pay that. And then,
I should just add, before we go into something else, that these terrorists who held a fundraiser for Barack Obama when he was running for Illinois State Senate in 1995, in their living room in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago, Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn showed up at the inauguration on Inauguration Day. And I know this because I saw them at about 11:30 in the morning in the flesh coming out of the Federal Center Southwest Metro Station with tickets for the inauguration ceremony in hand. So I guess that just goes to reinforce my earlier point that this is not they were certainly not there to celebrate Donald Trump. The inauguration festivities are a celebration of the peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, another
even for terrorists.
Even for terrorists. So another one of these commutations that we had was a fellow who was a Puerto Rican nationalist, and that was Oscar Lopez, and this is someone who was an official of the FALN. Now, that was the Puerto Rican nationalist group. 130 bombings back mostly in the 1970s. They attacked the famous Francis Tavern in Manhattan. They bombed, there were a series of bombs in Manhattan, forcing 100,000 workers at one point to evacuate their offices. People forget all of this. They think that 9/11 was something.
Didn't they force their way into the U.S. House of Representatives and riddle it with bullets?
Well, that was back in the 50s, and actually the guy who was my congressman, that part was before I was born, but my congressman was one of those who was shot.
Your congressman in utero?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. But back to what they were doing during this period for this terrorist whose sentence was commuted by Barack Obama. They plotted to kidnap President Reagan's son. They held people at the Bush headquarters and the Mondale headquarters.
Was that Ron or Michael Reagan?
That was Ron, yes.
Well, would that have been so much of a loss?
They tried to blow up a nuclear power plant. These are the people. And by the way, he had turned down a commutation back in 1999 under the Clinton administration, fortunately the only one, and he had turned it down because it would have required him to renounce violence, and he did not want to renounce
and as
violence.
Well, I understand he didn't want to leave his comrades behind who were still in prison.
Well, that was kind of the cover story, but mainly it was that he didn't want to renounce violence.
Maybe he stole that story from John McCain.
Yes, and also this is Guantanamo, so it's a slightly different thing, but we have the personal bodyguard of Osama bin Laden, who is believed to have been one of the people training for participation in 9/11. And he ended up not being one of those that was actually involved, but he did train for participation in it. So I guess that means it's okay to release him from Guantanamo. And of course, at the same time, we have people who are fleeing Cuba, as we've mentioned on previous show, who now are going to be sent back, at least unless President Trump can change the policy quickly, are going to be sent back to Cuba. And there was actually a comment on CBS regarding these refugees from one of the most murderous, hateful dictatorships in the history of the world, which is the Cuba of Fidel Castro and now his brother. And regarding those refugees, CBS said that Cuba agreed to take them back. They agreed to take them. Isn't that sweet? That sounds so nice.
They agreed to take them back for a few weeks until they can torture and murder them.
Exactly. So this is an administration.
PolitiFact would rate that statement from Cuba true.
So this is a president who started his career with extremists, and by the way, there was a much closer relationship with Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn than you would get just from the fact that he had this event at their house, and we'll detail that on a later show. But here you have a president who started his political career associating with terrorists and ended his political career helping out terrorists. And it just comes full circle. Is that arc we keep hearing about? The arc of history?
That bends towards progress or something?
Yeah.
The arc of history.
Bends toward
How
justice.
can we be so sure that President Obama's political career is over? After all, after his current vacation, I think, isn't he in Palm Springs, California with his wife and family members? He's rented a mansion in the Kalorama part of town of D.C., Embassy Row, and he's going to be staying here to fight for his legacy. So maybe it's not fair to say that his political career is over just yet, because he's not going to, he may not be able to do anything to stop Obamacare, for example, from being repealed, but he can certainly he can certainly scream and throw temper tantrums while it is being done. And there's no question the media will cover him.
Well, that prospect is very heartening to Republicans. That Barack Obama, he'll be about a mile from where we are in our offices, that he would be the leader of the opposition, because this is a fellow who's brought his political party to its lowest point in history in terms of office holders. And there are a lot of Republicans who would just love to have Barack Obama continue to be involved in our country's politics. So that's our show for this week. We'll be back next week, and we hope you'll join us. Please follow us at the Capital Research Center on Facebook, on our YouTube channel, and at Capital Research on Twitter. I'm Dr. Stephen J. Allen.
And I'm Matthew Vadum, Senior Vice President at Capital Research Center and Editor-in-Chief of BombThrowers.com. Please watch our mini documentary, America Under Siege, Civil War 2017, at our YouTube channel for Capital Research Center, or at DangerousDocumentaries.com.
And thanks for listening.